Hi. I've been playing Midnight pretty heavily since March, and I've got a lot to share about this expansion. World of Warcraft has been around for over 20 years now. In that time, the game has been both the undisputed king of MMORPGs and a massive source of disappointment. After the controversial Shadowlands era, trust in Blizzard took a serious hit. Players were just burned out on systems that only lasted for a single expansion before disappearing and leaving a void behind. But then the war within dropped, and unexpectedly proved that WoW can still be genuinely good. And now, we have Midnight, the second chapter of the Worldsoul Saga. This isn't just another expansion, it's a test. Was that recent success just a fluke, or has Blizzard actually found the right direction? While players know the cycle all too well, first comes the hype of new content, but a few weeks later comes the brutal reality check of the endgame, where we see if the game actually holds up. This time around, the devs aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. They're bringing back iconic locations, adding long-awaited features like player housing, and making the game way more accessible for new and returning players. It sounds like a step in the right direction. But the big question remains, is this actual evolution, or just another shiny launch that'll end in burnout? But before we dive deep into Midnight, let's take a step back from this specific expansion and look at World of Warcraft as an MMORPG in general. Because over the years, WoW has mutated into a very unusual game. On one hand, it's still your classic MMO with all the staples you'd expect: leveling, dungeons, raids, the economy, and social interaction. On the other hand, it's been a long time since it was that hardcore, old-school MMORPG where you grind for hours, absolutely rely on a group, and slowly inch your way forward. Modern WoW is more of a hybrid. It's a game that's trying to be solo-friendly while simultaneously giving you fast access to content. And that is its biggest strength and its biggest flaw. The lower barrier to entry has made the game a lot more comfortable. Leveling is faster, there are fewer mandatory chores, and you have way more freedom. But on the flip side, a lot of players feel like the actual value of their achievements is getting lost along the way. And it's exactly against this backdrop that Midnight looks incredibly interesting. The story in Midnight sets a dark tone right out of the gate. The Void is invading Azeroth once again, but this time, the target is Quel'Thala's and the Sunwell. Xal'atath takes the stage as the main threat, and at the center of it all is Alleria Windrunner and her own internal conflict. The expansion gives us 4 leveling zones with Silvermoon City acting as the main hub. The city has gotten bigger, more vertical, and noticeably more alive. But thanks to the complex architecture, navigating it can get a bit clunky, and early access to flying kind of breaks the pacing. You end up just soaring right past a good chunk of the content. The game has also become a lot more intuitive right from the start. Returning to WoW used to mean slamming into a brick wall of mechanics and having to install a dozen add-ons. But now, the basics are actually explained in-game without needing third-party guides or mods. This is a huge deal, because that high barrier to entry used to scare a lot of players away. The second big thing is the structure of the campaign. Instead of a strictly linear zone-by-zone progression, Midnight actually gives you choices. After kicking things off in Eversong Woods, you decide where to go next: Zolomon, Harrender, or the Earthy storyline. And only then does the game bring everything together in the final zone, Voidstorm. It's a minor tweak, but it always feels better when you're the one calling the shots. It doesn't completely get rid of that theme park, conveyor belt feel, but it definitely makes the game feel more alive. The Earthy storyline really stands out here. It's not just a side quest, but a real attempt to weave a personal story into a massive global conflict. It does a great job exploring the clash between the light and the void, along with the characters' inner doubts. This is a major step for WoW. The game still relies on epic scale, but now there's a sharper focus on the characters themselves. Ultimately, Blizzard didn't revolutionize the gameplay, but they made the game clearer, smoother, and way less on rails. New mechanics and classes. When it comes to new features in Midnight, 2 things really stand out: a new race and a new specialization. First up, the Harrender. Blizzard went out of their way to make them look as different from the usual races as possible. Think bioluminescence, living bark, fungal motifs, and a deep connection to Azeroth's nature. Visually, they look super fresh and immediately stand out from classic WoW aesthetics. But they aren't restricted in gameplay either. They have access to a ton of classes. So they aren't just cosmetic window dressing, they're a fully fleshed out part of the game. But let's be real, the Heronir are more of a nice world building expansion than a reason to actually buy the expansion. They add flavor and variety, but they don't fundamentally change the game. The real highlight here is the new Demon Hunter specialization, the Devourer. This is a third spec built entirely around the power of the Void. You're literally ripping energy out of your enemies, using it for attacks, and shifting into empowered forms. The gameplay is a true hybrid between melee and ranged combat. You have to constantly manage your positioning and resources, and know exactly when to weave between the two playstyles. And Blizzard really nailed it with this one. The spec is easy to pick up at a basic level, but it still leaves a ton of room for min-maxing in high-end content. A rare balance that WoW doesn't always pull off. In the end, the Devourer doesn't just feel like a novelty, it feels like a logical evolution of the class. It doesn't break the core concept, it expands on it, and introduces a completely fresh playstyle. Simply put, it's easily one of the best gameplay additions in Midnight. To be completely honest, the biggest draw of Midnight isn't the raids or the story, it's player housing. It's a feature fans have been begging for years, and it's finally in the game. It's built like a full-blown sandbox. You get a plot of land, build a house, customize every little detail, arrange furniture, and show off rare items and trophies. You can change the color and size of objects and place them however you want, completely freeform. No rigid templates. There is a decoration limit, but as you level up your house, that cap gradually increases. Blizzard made a crucial decision here. Housing gives absolutely zero bonuses to player power or farming. You engage with it purely because you want to, not because you have to, and the ground rules are as player-friendly as it gets. Housing is available to everyone without restrictions. You can invite friends over regardless of their faction, and you can choose to live in either public or private neighborhoods. But the most interesting part is how it impacts the game itself. Housing has revitalized the economy. Professions have gotten a second wind. Players are mass crafting furniture and decor, and the auction house is now buzzing with visual items, not just gear. Plus, the neighborhoods and Endeavor systems turn housing into a genuinely social activity. You aren't just building a house, you're becoming part of a community, interacting with other players, and developing the space together. Ultimately, housing is the most massive secondary feature added to WoW in years. It has a lot of room to grow, and I think with every new expansion, we'll see it get fleshed out with new mechanics and cosmetics. The second core system in Midnight is Prey, and this is Blizzard's attempt to fix one of World of Warcraft's oldest problems: the lack of a proper endgame for solo players. At its core, Prey is a revamped take on rare mob hunting. But now, you don't just fly to a pin on the map and nuke the target. The system is built around the hunt itself. You have to track your bounty by completing various activities before you can finally engage them. And it goes both ways. You're not just a hunter, you're potential prey. Especially on higher difficulties, where the enemy can ambush you at any moment. Pull off a successful hunt, and you're rewarded with more than just cosmetics or mats. You get gear comparable to entry-level raid loot. And all of this happens without ever needing to sit in a group finder. The idea is solid, but in practice, it's not flawless. After a while, the structure of the hunt starts feeling repetitive. Players figure out the optimal way to farm, and it quickly devolves into that familiar loop: find, kill, loot, repeat. At launch, it just lacks the variety needed to hold your attention as effectively as classic endgame content. Right now, it's a great foundation, but it still needs to be built upon. One of the biggest questions is how friendly Midnight is to newcomers and returning players. And here, Blizzard has made some serious strides. The level cap has been bumped up to 90, but what really matters is the journey there. You no longer have to slog through all the old content. The game provides a streamlined, clear-cut path, letting you jump straight into the current expansion incredibly fast. At the same time, they've smoothed out the onboarding process. The UI is way more informative now. Crucial things like damage readouts, boss warnings, and cooldowns are baked right into the base interface. Overall, let's just be straightforward. In 2026, World of Warcraft is significantly more accessible. It's still a complex game, but it no longer requires you to tab out to dozens of guides and download a suite of third-party tools just to play at a baseline level. However, it's not without its controversial choices. The talent system looks deep, but in reality, most builds quickly boil down to a couple of cookie-cutter options. The choice is there, but a lot of the time, it feels like an illusion. It's a similar story with the classes themselves. The game is cleaner, and the specs are much easier to pick up, but some of that depth is lost in the process. If you value fine-tuning and having a truly unique build, you might find the new systems a bit too simplified. I also have to touch on microtransactions. The game shop has become way more prominent, and seeing that certain things can just be bought outright definitely dampens the feeling of progression. Let's get to the good stuff, the real reason we're all here. How's the content? Well, Midnight is absolutely packed with it. At launch, we get the classic starter pack, 8 new dungeons, 11 delves, and multiple raid activities right off the bat. And Blizzard actually decided to take a fresh approach to raiding this time. Instead of suffocating players with one massive launch raid, the developers fragmented the endgame. We've got Voidspire, a classic 6-boss raid, Dreamrift, a more compact, 1-boss mini-raid for quick runs, and March on Quel'Danas, a later raid featuring 2 bosses. Why does this format work better? Obviously, a fresh max-level character isn't going to just waltz right into March on Quel'Danas. You simply won't get in without the required item level. The flexibility of the endgame here lies in something else: parallel progression paths. To gear up your character for hardcore content, you no longer have to farm a single starter raid until you're blue in the face. You have alternative entry points for high-level gear. You can gear up through the bite-sized Dreamrift, push Mythic Plus keys, or just loot great gear by running delves solo or with friends. Progression has become versatile. You choose exactly how you want to farm your ilval, and it's a fantastic way to prevent routine and burnout. Alongside this, Blizzard is continuing to develop delves, and there's great news for solo players. We've been given a new companion, Valeera Sanguinar. Combined with systems like Prey, delves have fully cemented themselves as the perfect PvE format that you can just chill and clear at your own pace, completely independent from toxic pugs. On top of that, Blizzard is trying not to abandon the open world, steadily rolling out new activities so we have something to do between instanced content. A prime example is the Void Invasion system. Essentially, it's an evolution of dynamic events in the vein of the good old Legion assaults or time rifts, but deeply woven into the dark aesthetic of Midnight. The sky grows dark, the familiar zone shifts, and players have to organically team up right there in the open world to close rifts, mow down mobs, and clear out mini-bosses. And what about PvP? They threw a bone to the players who love to smash each other too. They added Slayer's Rise, a brand new, epic 40 vs 40 battleground. It's your classic massive meat grinder with a heavy focus on hard area control and massive team fights. And there's one more thing I absolutely have to mention when talking about PvP, a radically new mode for WoW. The devs finally added their own official version of Prop Hunt. The mechanic is super familiar from other games, but for Azeroth, it sounds absolutely wild. One team disguises themselves as everyday objects, vases, lamps, barrels, while the other team has to track them down using special skills and radars. Then the teams swap roles, and whoever finds all the enemies the fastest takes the win. It's a purely fun, stress-free format that gives you a massive break from sweaty arenas and serious battlegrounds. And honestly, it's exactly the kind of casual, entertaining content the game has been missing for a long time. The biggest victory of Midnight is that Blizzard finally stopped trying to reinvent the wheel. They dropped the habit of tearing the game down to its foundations with every expansion and focused on what matters, making WoW cohesive and comfortable. And honestly, you can really feel it. The return to Quel'Thalas and the Silvermoon revamp. This hits the bullseye, but it works because of more than just nostalgia. We got a massive, fully fledged update to the old zones that feels like a living, logical evolution of the world. Long-awaited player housing, a true breath of fresh air. We finally have a strong alternative motivation. Now you can focus on collecting decor instead of just sweating in raids for gear. This gives the game that peaceful depth it desperately needed outside the usual grind, a lower barrier to entry. WoW has finally turned its attention to newbies and players coming back from a long break. Leveling is faster, the base UI is more intuitive, and that insane reliance on dozens of third-party add-ons is finally starting to fade. A flexible campaign structure. The devs did a great job breaking up the storyline routine. Having the freedom to pick your direction, split quest lines, and a smart mix of old and new zones makes the playthrough feel much more alive and way less of a slog. But let's take off the rose-tinted glasses. For all its pros, Midnight still drags along some old baggage, and some of these issues have become chronic. First, the quests. Let's be honest, this mechanic is outdated, not just in WoW, but in the MMORPG genre as a whole. Long story short, it's just boring. Because of this, the whole leveling process to 90 turns into a dull, routine chore that you forget about by the next day. Second, the casualization of classes. Yes, talents and skills got streamlined again. The game became clearer and more welcoming, but it paid for it with its depth. Builds seem way too obvious now, and the actual process of choosing has lost its weight. The illusion of freedom shatters the second you open a guide on Wowhead. And this transitions smoothly into the third problem, the dictatorship of the meta. And again, this is a genre-wide issue. No matter how many beautiful, branching talent trees and mountains of alternative gear the devs design, the outcome is always the same. There is a strict mathematical template. Step out of line, and you do 0 damage. This completely kills any desire to experiment. Because if you don't play the template, you just don't get invited to high keys and you get kicked from raids. You either play correctly, or you don't play the endgame at all. And finally, the global problem of modern WoW. The game has forgotten how to make rewards actually feel rewarding. Veterans from the Wrath of the Lich King days will know exactly what I mean. Think back to how hyped you'd get over a new mount, a rare pet, or a badass title. It was a status symbol. Now, the game suffers from severe value inflation. Loot and cosmetics are just raining from the sky, and getting them takes 0 effort. So when that 500th mount drops into your bottomless collection, you don't jump out of your chair. You just say, okay, and keep running. Midnight doesn't try to flip the genre on its head or rebuild WoW from scratch. And as we already established, that's actually a plus. Instead of piling on disposable new mechanics just for the sake of experimenting, Blizzard took the time to polish the foundation. This isn't a revolution, it's a confident, steady evolution. In 2026, World of Warcraft once again looks like a project deserving of your time. Not because it suddenly became perfect, but because it's more comfortable, cohesive, and logical. The expansion does a great job juggling the interests of different audiences. Veterans get a predictably stable endgame and a gorgeous Silvermoon revamp. Lore fans get a genuinely dark storyline featuring Xal'atath against the backdrop of an epic clash between the light and the void. And casual solo players get long-awaited features like housing and autonomous content like Delves. World of Warcraft is finally starting to look like the game we always wanted it to be. Blizzard cut out the unnecessary tediousness and made Azeroth as welcoming as possible for anyone looking to brush the dust off their old account. If you want to jump into Midnight completely fresh or return after a long hibernation, check out the description below the video. I've left my referral link down there. Use it to grab some sweet starter bonuses that will save you a ton of time in the early stages. Now it's your turn. Head down to the comments and share what you think about WoW right now. Are you giving Midnight a shot, or is your time in Azeroth gone for good? The Image Game channel was with you. Have a nice day.